Good afternoon, everybody in the audience. A special welcome to the Czech ambassador. Very nice that you're here. To the mayor of Gooismeren, of which Naarden is, of course, a very important city. A very special welcome to Ina van Beek, widow of our former director Hans van der Linde. To everybody else here in the audience. And of course to the people who are watching this event online. Welcome to the 2021 Comenius Lecture, and of course a very warm welcome to Mpho Tutu van Furth, who will be the lecturer of the Comenius Lecture. Jan Amos Comenius was born on March 28 in 1592. Each year we celebrate his birthday around March 28, so this year a little bit later. And each year we ask a renowned speaker to inspire us by translating Comenius' teachings and views on education, science, humanity, society of more than 400 years ago to translate it into a current topic. In a little while, Mpho Tutu van Furth will share with us her views on the importance of education, but first allow me to make a few remarks. By the way, my name is Boris Dittrich. I'm a writer and a senator in the Dutch Parliament. I'm from Czech descent. In the early 90s, my late father was the chair of the Comenius Foundation. I'm a member of the Board of Advisors to the Comenius Museum, and it's my honor to be your moderator for today. So first a few words about Jan Amos Comenius. Who was he? He was the founder of pedagogy, the science of teaching. He was a theologian, a philosopher, and a diplomat. In his life and publications, he devoted himself to improve humanity, or simply put, to make this world a better place for all human beings. And during his life, he had to flee many countries and cities he was living in, and he ended up in Amsterdam, where he lived the last 14 years of his life. And he was buried here in Naarden, here in the mausoleum, which is part of the museum. And this is Jan Amos Comenius' grave. Many of his more than 250 writings were published in Amsterdam in the 17th century, where the freedom of press was exceptionally liberal. According to Comenius' educational teachings, education needs to be diverse and complete from a holistic viewpoint. It needs to be accessible for people from all ages and backgrounds, accessible for all genders, preferably into one's mother's tongue, so that students can develop themselves into well-balanced citizens. Comenius wanted school to be a place of joy. He was against corporal punishment, and he introduced illustrations in his teachings. Let me end this introduction by one wonderful quote from Comenius, from his book, The Consultation Catholica, from 1667. And I quote, "We are all citizens of one world. To hate a person because he was born elsewhere, because he speaks a different language, because he has different views, because he knows more or less than you, what an ignorance, because we are all human beings and therefore not perfect. We all need help. Nobody is without commitment towards other people." If you would like to know more about Comenius, you can of course visit the museum or go to our website of the Comenius Museum in Naarden. So now I'm very honored to introduce to you Mpho Tutu van Furth, who will give this 2021 Comenius Lecture. Mpho is a priest. She's a speaker, public speaker. She's a writer. She's a theologian, an artist, a mother, and also the youngest daughter of South African Archbishop and human rights activist Desmond Tutu and his wife Leah. From her children, she has acquired a passion for girls' safety and well-being. She's married to her Dutch wife, Marcelina van Furth, very welcome. And together with her father, Desmond Tutu, she's the author of 2 books, Made for Goodness and The Book of Forgiving. And she wrote the book Tutu, the Authorized Portrait. The title of her lecture is Real Lived Equality. Dear Mpho, may I introduce you and come up, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. In South Africa, we say all protocols observed, meaning I have greeted you, Madame Ambassador, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Voorsitter, and I am delighted to be here with you today. It's a little bit odd being in a live space with real, living, breathing people rather than only having the interaction with a screen after a whole year of living with COVID. I'm really delighted that Ina van Beek is here and really grateful this day to be able to honor the memory of Hans van der Linde, who first, persistently and insistently, invited me to deliver this lecture 2 years ago. So my parents left teaching in 1955. They were, at the time, a young couple with a passion for education. My father, the child of a school principal, loved nothing more than standing in front of a classroom, coaxing young minds into discovering the beauty of language and the miracles of insight which they were capable of. But in 1953, the architect of apartheid, Hendrik Verwoerd, introduced the Bantu Education Act that created separate systems of education for South Africans on the basis of race. One result was that the South African government spent on the education of one white child 12 times what it spent on the education of one black child. The intended consequences were visible in poor or absent physical facilities: broken desks, broken windows, insufficient books and materials, non-existent labs, non-existent gyms, non-existent sports fields and art rooms, an absence of musical enrichment programs, and an absence of feeding schemes. The Bantu education curriculum was designed to only equip black children for servitude. The intended consequences were largely achieved. For my parents, unable to countenance trying to instill in children the lessons of servitude that the curriculum demanded, my parents resigned their roles in protest. They could not be teachers. Within a generation of the Bantu Education Act, rote learning had replaced inspired teaching, and academic aspiration and achievement among Black children experienced a steep decline, from which both aspiration and achievement have yet to fully recover. The apartheid government expressed an arrogant transparency. They made no pretense of reaching for equality. They were determined to create in Black South Africans an impoverished underclass that would be a vast labor pool, educated enough to follow orders, but not equipped to imagine another way of being or doing. The architects of apartheid recognized that a key method for excluding the possibility of a lived equality in every aspect of society was to ensure that education was unequal, and to ensure that even with access, the education provided was unequal in quality and unequal in content. That was deliberate government policy. 3 centuries earlier, an impoverished orphan, John Amos Comenius, had imagined the opposite, and his ideas formed the foundation of what has become the putative goal of modern education. Comenius wanted to ensure equal access to academic opportunity to all, without regard to gender, race, class, or economic status. Comenius wanted to instill a culture of lifelong learning. As Thomas Halleck, who is the laureate from last year, this year, COVID year, who knows? As he wrote, that Comenius' great dream was a dream of a world that is a workshop of humanity, a school of authentic existence. And much of Comenius' pedagogy is alive in the world today. He wanted education to be an inspired and inspiring pursuit. He conceived of a system of learning in which each stage built upon and broadened the knowledge and insights acquired in the previous stage. He promoted a practical approach to language acquisition that attached words to objects. So door, window, ram, point and show. So he introduced mother tongue instruction. He designed illustrated textbooks for children. And he opened the classroom to children of every gender and social class. In the past 2 decades, more countries around the world have pinned their future hopes to democratic governments. Often, the changes in regime and governance have come with constitutional changes that enshrine equality as the highest ideal. Unfortunately, the equality promised on paper has not yet translated into a real lived experience for the marginalized millions. Peoples from around the world have looked to the Western nations, particularly to North America and the nations of Western Europe, as they have sought to craft a path to a real lived equality. And, at first glance, European models of education and governance offer promising examples of school undergirding and supporting true democracy. An educated citizenry is equipped to demand that the promises of democracy be fulfilled. They are best able to require accountability from their political leaders. They have the knowledge and the skill to understand the choices made in their name and on their behalf. One would think that the American and European systems of education provide for equal access to all the benefits of learning for all citizens. Closer examination belies first impressions. In the time of COVID-19 inspired lockdowns, we see that even in the wealthiest countries, equal access to education is a bit of a fiction, with consequences that will reverberate through our societies for decades to come. In the 17th century, with no internet, no electronic libraries, no children's educational television programming, Comenius had offered a pedagogy that really could help us to craft a system of hybrid learning that could point the way to a real lived equality. Bringing young minds online, i.e., activating the intelligence of our youth, is our best hope for creating a world in which equal access to opportunity and equal dignity are not paper promises, but are the embodied experience of all humanity. But first, to some current experience. Last year, I listened to a podcast series from the New York Times. It was entitled Nice White Parents. And it was an examination of the failures of integration in the New York public schools. There were two observations that were made about the situation in New York that aligned with my recent experience in the Netherlands. The observations addressed integration and what's called resource hoarding. I'll note before going on that as Guido Walraven states in a paper from 2013, in the Netherlands, segregation and desegregation is an issue that divides political parties and school boards. And the usual way of dealing with this sensitive issue is to ignore it, because you cannot reach an agreement easily. And while in the Dutch polder model, agreement is necessary. In the Netherlands, parents can choose the schools they think is best for their child, and most of the time, that turns out to be a school that is dominated by parents just like them. So in terms of socioeconomic status, lifestyle, and educational style. And as a consequence, even in a neighborhood with mixed housing and a mixed population, there tend to be both black and white schools. Hannah Joffe-Walt, the host of the series Nice White Parents, in a New York Times article observed, accidental segregation happens by well-meaning people who just don't want their kids to lose out. There were so many ways in which the school system and white parents maintained segregation in schools by creating separate academic tracks, by clustering in certain schools, or by hoarding resources. So those are two things to hold in the back of your mind as I relate these two stories. So my son is a migrant. He only really started learning the Dutch language when he came to this country 4.5 years ago. And I'm going to brag because he's like top in his class in Dutch, but okay. He has the advantage that he lives in a household with two fast-talking Dutch step-siblings and a stepmother who is an academic with vast experience in the Dutch school system. So unlike friends who started their Dutch language learning at the same time as he did, his language acquisition has been broad and fast. And unlike 80% of immigrant learners who are placed in the lowest level of secondary education, he is in his second year of VWO. Although my son is intelligent, absolutely brilliant, and hardworking, I don't believe that he's remarkably more so than 80% of the other immigrant children who entered the Netherlands at the same time as he did. I suspect that his advies had at least as much to do with having a Dutch step-parent who had immediate access to information that is transparent to a native speaker and quite opaque to a parent struggling with the language. I remember my own frustration and bewilderment trying, with my sketchy Dutch, and my Dutch is really sketchy, to navigate the mysteries of school choice as my son completed his basisschool. Both he and I were slightly more secure in the language when he finished his Kopklas, which is an intermediate language immersion year between the end of basisschool and the beginning of middelbare school. I felt more competent both to advise him and to advocate for him within the context of the school system. I don't know how many other immigrant parents had the advantage of fairly rapid language acquisition through classes and home conversation, paired with a better grasp of the mysteries of the Dutch schooling system. I vividly remember attending a parents' evening for Kopklas, for this intermediate language immersion class, and having all of the information presented in Dutch with no translation services offered. A moment of thought would have indicated that the reason that the children needed Kopklas was probably that neither they nor their parents were proficient in Dutch. My son is now enrolled in a school that offers MAVO, HAVO, and VWO, the 3 strands of learning. The vast majority of learners are people of color, and given the sparse smattering of white children enrolled in that school, it's remarkable how disproportionately white children are represented in my son's VWO group. The academic tracking and the social and economic and racial clustering result from well-intentioned policies that collide with every parent's wish to provide the best available resources for their individual child, without regard to the broader impact of their choices. My stepdaughter is in her 2nd year of medical school. The admissions process here, as in other countries, is fiercely competitive. My stepdaughter is a clever and really hardworking girl. She has applied herself to and enjoyed her study throughout high school. In preparation for her end exam, her school arranged a revision retreat for the students in her year. So for several days and evenings, the learners reviewed test material with their instructors. A wonderful thing. Her school, though a public school, was well populated with the children of affluent and well-educated parents. My stepson is in a different school and writing his end exam now. The school he attends is more diverse than that which his sister attended. Many of the students are immigrants and have full-time jobs alongside their study. I doubt that even outside COVID times that these students would have been offered a retreat to review their learning in preparation for their end exam. My stepdaughter started her study in the time before COVID. On her first day of instruction, a lecturer asked her first-year medical school class how many of the students had at least one parent who was a doctor. 90% of the students raised their hand. This may be because children will often go into the family business. I, after all, am a priest. It may also have to do with having access to the resources that will give an applicant the inside track, so a legitimately derived advantage in a competition. What would such advantages look like? Well, information about how the exam process works, someone to ask about any potential exam material about which one feels shaky, enough money to travel to another city to enroll in a prep course. A non-immigrant would be more likely to have friends or relatives who can offer a place to stay during a prep period. There are other advantages that most people in this room would probably take for granted, and so consider the benefits that make a difference in the schooling environment. Material benefits that seem immaterial, like a room of one's own, so one can study undisturbed, a laptop of one's own, access to the books and journals one may need to study, Wi-Fi in the house, minimal household chores, all of which are advantages that our children experience. I know that my son, my stepson, and my stepdaughter benefited from all of the above. And don't get me wrong, I don't say this to say that my stepdaughter is in any way undeserving of her place in medical school. She worked hard, and she took full advantage of the resources that were available to her. But I do say we must keep a sharp eye on how skewed resources will skew results. An equally clever, hard-working student without access to many of the resources listed above will experience an outcome that isn't truly reflective of his or her ability. As we come to the end of another academic year colored by COVID, the impact on education and thus the impact on equality has been experienced at home and abroad. According to data from UNESCO, schooling was disrupted for more than 1.3 billion learners from pre-primary through secondary school in over 190 countries around the globe over the course of this pandemic. Now, in 46 countries, 735 million students, more than half of whom are girls, don't know when they will next sit in a classroom. And if those challenges face girls, you can imagine that those challenges are even more felt by people who have any kind of physical or mental disability to contend with. The consequences for girls can be more egregious than for boys. Girls are at a heightened risk for gender-based violence. Without the regular escape into the classroom, life under lockdown has been a dangerous experience. Often girls are trapped in homes with their abusers and with no recourse to reporting that the school environment could provide. The burden of unpaid care and domestic chores falls more heavily on the shoulders of girls than of boys. With a full house and younger siblings to care for, a girl's learning opportunities are often sacrificed to the tasks of childcare and household chores. This happens in both wealthy and impoverished nations. As school and work have both moved online, overwhelmed parents have had to prioritize the jobs that put food on the table over the learning that might yield future dividends. So keeping a younger brother or sister occupied so that your parents can work takes precedence over completing a homework assignment. The effects of that choice may be vaguely visible in the present, but the cumulative effect of skimmed lessons and skipped assignments now will be doors closed to opportunity in the future. Girls will be condemned by the current crisis to the low-skilled, low-wage jobs that have been their lot for centuries. Gains made in education for girls in recent decades are being erased in the current crisis. Gains made in education for poor people and people of color are being eroded as the crisis continues. Gains made for people living with disabilities are vanishing as this crisis continues. With the resources at hand and a commitment to transformation, Comenius managed to craft and create and implement an inclusive pedagogy that was applied in his time and has lasted through the centuries. His ideas spread around the world and continue to be the foundation for educational systems everywhere. We are so much better equipped to ensure meaningful access to education. We have internet and radio, we have podcasts and TV programs, we have downloadable video and cheap printing. We can readily pair the business sector with the academy to ensure that poorly resourced areas have the opportunity to engage in everything from basic education to advanced degrees. There is wealth in what we have done in the past, but there are untapped riches ready to hand that we have not fully employed. The next academic Nobel laureate may be languishing under the gaze of a teacher who has dismissed her intelligence because of her poor language skill. The next medical genius may have been denied entry to the program that would catalyze his gifts because he couldn't pay for the extra cram lessons that his peers could afford. Our world is teetering on a precipice. The desire for democracy is burning in the hearts of so many people in disparate nations around the world, but the determination for domination is thriving in the hearts and minds of too many people who wield power, too many who hold the reins of government. Our world is teetering on the precipice of extinction. We have ravaged the natural world with our rapacious greed. We need the skills, insights, and wisdom of the generation that will live the consequences of our actions and inaction to help us craft the solutions that will make our world livable for all again. We have crafted systems of education that are designed to undergird our greed. Now we must create systems of education that are designed to meet the world's need. We have created systems that guarantee that the many will barely survive while the few flourish and thrive. We are still training a generation to strive for the top level of society by trampling on the strata below. But now we must reimagine education. We must construct a system in which equal opportunity is a reality. We're wasting the talent of so many young people. We can no longer afford the unfairness that we have ingrained. It should not be only by chance that the next Comenius comes by entry into the academy. The doors of learning must be open to all, and they can. We have the resources to manage that. Now all we need is the will to share.
So Mpho, let me take you back to the first part of your lecture. Yeah. Where this was before COVID times, and you were talking about the educational system in the United States, in Western European countries, and you said equal access to education and to the benefits of learning to all citizens is actually not realized. Because when you really look at it, it's, and then you gave a lot of examples. My question would be, why is that the case? Because Comenius already almost 400 years ago was paving the way to education for all. How come we didn't accomplish that? Do you have any idea?
I suspect that there are two things that we have to contend with in looking at what an education system does. When we think of education, when we think of educating our young people, we think of educating our children to get ahead, and so if your goal is that your child gets ahead, they have to get ahead of somebody, and so the commitment to broadly accessible resources is shaky, to say the least. If I have an opportunity for my child to derive some advantage, I feel like a bad parent if I don't take it. And with the goal in mind that my child is going to be able to get ahead.
Yeah. Actually, this is a very, very current topic because, as you know, we've had our elections in the Netherlands, and now politicians are forming a new government, and they are talking about the inequality of opportunities, not only in education, of course, but let's say more general in society. What advice would you give those politicians to amend the situation and to achieve real lived equality?
Well, it takes an examination of what are the things that make for inequality. So if this area is heavily resourced and this area is under-resourced, then trying to balance that out, finding a way to balance out how places are resourced. I had a news story also from the US quite recently of a public school, very well resourced public school in a fairly affluent area. Many of the parents of children who went to this particular school sat on the school board and so on and so forth, and were able to advocate for resources to be sent to that school. And a decision was made that at that school a new sports field was going to be constructed, and it was the children who said that doesn't make sense. We see that in our community there's a school over there that doesn't have sports facilities at all. Even if our sports facilities are not state of the art, they exist. And so that resource should rightly be sent to the other school. And maybe having heard it coming from their children, the parents could then say, yeah, okay, let's think differently about how we apply resources, but also without the sense of guilt that I'm cheating my child of something that, that I would be able to provide them.
So actually what I can take away from your example is that we should listen also to young people when they come up with suggestions or solutions to such a problem, and we shouldn't leave it to older people like me, for instance.
Yes, and. Yes, absolutely. We should listen to young people. Young people have a lot of wisdom and are gifted in so many ways and have so much insight and intelligence to offer us. But we should stop forcing young people to get us off the hook. We as adults, as leaders, I mean, we were chosen, you, not me. But, if you're elected to lead. You're elected on the basis that you have made a commitment to represent the best will of the people. Don't pass the ball back and say, well, it's too hard for us to do. We'll leave it for the kids to figure out. We, as adults, we as elected leaders, we need to be taking the lead and making the choices that need to be made.
Well, actually, to broaden this a little bit, it's society's responsibility to understand the importance of education. My next question to you would then be, how is it possible that in the Netherlands everybody actually agrees that teaching is a very important profession, like Comenius already wrote in his writings, and still there is, we need a lot of teachers, and young people tend not to, go into the educational system, but prefer to go into IT or other professions. So how can we make the job of teachers more important?
Oh, we don't have to make it more important. We have to recognize how important it is. And there's a
sketchy English, but you're right.
Well, no, I mean, I think that we don't recognize how important teaching is. We say the words. We say, they're molding the minds of the next generation, or things that sound really sexy like that. But we don't act as though it actually matters. So we don't act as though it matters in the checkbook. We don't act as though it matters in the resources that we apply to education, as opposed to, like when you start looking at where we allocate resources in our national budget, that tells us everything about what we think is important.
But is allocating money a driving force in trying to lure people becoming teachers?
It's not everything, but it helps.
It certainly does, yes.
No, it's not everything. It does help. But it also requires us as parents to have a regard and a respect for the profession of teaching. We have a very high regard for all kinds of science and technology, and oh my gosh, you're amazing with the internet, and can you Instagram 700, photographs a minute? Wow, you're amazing. We don't invest that kind of admiration and high regard in our teachers. It's kind of once a year you'll get a teacher on the front page because they're the teacher of the year. And then ever after that, that's about the last thing, it's the first and the last thing that you hear about teachers all the way through the course of the year. But when you go flipping through the business pages, there's every kind of technology giant, and he did this and she did that, and how amazing are they in all of these several ways, with no regard to the fact that they only manage to achieve those things that they achieve because a teacher somewhere instilled in them the learning and the capability and opens their imagination to whatever it is that they have managed to achieve. And so, maybe if we started putting teachers on the front pages a few more times and leading the news with them a few more times, we would start to think of teachers as teaching as being a profession that's worth going into.
So actually, I hear you say it's a collective effort to put teachers back on the pedestal where they should be, actually.
Indeed.
You also gave, I thought, a rather pessimistic view on education after Corona times, after the COVID, because what you said was actually girls, other groups, for instance, migrant groups or maybe disability people, they are losing all the advantages they have been gaining before COVID, because COVID really put them backwards. How can we try to fix this? Because you also sketched that it might take a generation or even more to come back to the same level.
I don't think that that's a reality only for girls. I think that COVID has been devastating for all learners in all kinds of ways. Young people are so unused to being in a classroom. What is the classroom etiquette? How is it to learn together? How do we share information, inspire one another, etc., etc. Some young people have anxiety even about going back into the classroom. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be in a room with, however many people it is in my classroom that I haven't experienced for more than a year, and I have to do a whole mental adjustment to being in a crowded space again. So it's not just girls and people of color and people with disabilities who have experienced setbacks in this COVID time. The setbacks have been pretty universal. It's just that those who are closer to the edge are the ones who are most likely to fall off the edge. And so it is an absolute requirement that we pay closest attention to those who have been most sitting on the edge of the educational experience.
Do you think that because so many people had to do homeschooling during COVID times, that maybe the appreciation for the profession of teachers has grown, and that maybe society might now think, okay, we underestimated the value of being a teacher?
One would hope, but we can't testify to the quality of home teaching, of homeschooling that children were receiving. So for some children, homeschooling was, being parked in front of the television and just be quiet, please, until I'm done with whatever it is that I'm doing. And for some, homeschooling was real labor-intensive, labor of love for of a parent with a child, and for most, it was somewhere between the two. One would hope that it would deepen an appreciation of the teaching task. But I also think that parents have been incredibly stressed through this period, and parents of younger children and parents of children with special needs have been especially stressed during this period. And I'm not sure that translates to an admiration for a teacher and the work that the teacher does, as much as it translates to, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be able to have 2 minutes of my own to rub together?
I have one more question for you, and then I will turn to the audience here and online to see if there are some questions there. My last question is something you did not address in your lecture, but when I compare you with Comenius, this is a rough sketch, of course. He was okay. He was a very religious person. He was also an archbishop at one point in his life, and he wrote also about religion. You are a priest, an Anglican priest. Do you think in, let's say, the post-COVID times, and then turning to education, that religion has a specific role to play in fighting inequality?
I think that religion has a lot to say about fighting inequality. In most specifically in the sense of recognizing the worth of every human being. And recognizing that worth as being inherent to the human being. And so the drive for an equality of access to the good things of life is seen as an equality of access that is required by virtue of the fact that we are human together, that we are all, each and all of us, made in the image and likeness of God, and we should, each and all, have recourse to the best resources that the world has to offer.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm now looking in the audience if somebody has a question. Yes, the mayor of Gooismere. Yes, please come forward.
Thank you very much for your speech. I 400% agree with you, but I'm more optimistic than you are. I have some good messages in that case. Firstly, in my city here, we have a total inclusive policy for education, for people, and we have to do it because Comenius is here, of course. But we do it, and that's the first thing. The second thing is that the government here in the Netherlands has the intention to give, I think, 8 billion euros to cope with the problems you mentioned from the education problems of the Corona period. So 8 billion euros, that's the amount of money, and we hope that it will succeed, because young people are very adaptive. They are very short. They can react. They can quickly recuperate, and so in that case I'm very optimistic, and we heard it also from pedagogists and that sort of people. So it's perhaps for sometimes some people younger have no problems, others have to do it to cope with it after 3 years, but it is quite quickly with children. We hope, yes, with this amount of money. And the third thing, what I would say is, you mentioned the last point of the religion. Last week I read, I don't know if you know it, but there's a new encyclic from the Pope Francis. You know it?
No.
It's the encyclic. It's a very thick one. Tutti Fratelli.
Oh yes.
You know it? All brothers and sisters. And I think it's a good moment, in case this speech of you, this moment to have a vision, a mission also, from the Pope to the people, and there are 1.2 billion Catholics, so it is important that he says to all these Catholic people and the other people in the world, he expressed the inclusive society. It is more necessary than wherever in the past. He says that, and the famous thing in which he was inspired. He mentioned he was inspired by Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, and Mahatma Gandhi. So I would say that's also a part of religion. You mentioned it. Now he takes it from the Catholic Church, and he was inspired by your father, and so I think good to mention this. And thank you very much for your speech.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you want to reflect on what the mayor said? In the meantime, I'm looking around if there's somebody else who'd like to ask a question.
No, just to thank you and to say, well, who can disagree with the Pope?
Well, I think Comenius has taught us that we are all human beings who can think for ourselves and make our own decisions. And so sometimes you can disagree with an authority, and that's okay if you can, of course, reasonably make up some arguments for that.
Well, on this issue, I think not.
Yes, no, you're right. But actually, the Pope and you agree that we should have an inclusive society full of diversity and real lived equality. And that's why I think the title of your lecture is so well chosen, because real lived equality is so much different from what we have on paper. And so it's a message for the whole of society, but also for politicians to really look behind legislation, what's going on in society, and try to fix and amend those things that need to be addressed. I don't think there are any more questions, so I would like to end this wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Mpho, thank you so much. Your lecture will be online within the near future. And so we can all watch it again and think about it, but you gave us food for thought, and we can reflect on what you said, and hopefully your message has come through loud and clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you again in the Comenius Museum here in Naarden. Thank you, and thanks to everybody who was watching at home. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.